anytime you like, let's go, see how it goes, and you see how it goes.
Absolutely. So, one of your first celebrated posts was producer of the Billy Cotton Band Show. As one of the most famous people in Britain during the 30s and 40s, how did you make him relevant for the new medium of television?
Well, actually, I didn't. I mean, I didn't at first. ATV in London was the first to put the Billy Cotton Band Show on television. In a 6-week series when ITV went on the air in 1955, and Billy didn't like it. It used up too much of the material that he and the band had built up over the years, and a weekly series was too much of a disruption of the music hall tours, which paid the wages of his 16 musicians, whether they worked or not. His son, young Bill, became a great friend of mine, encouraged him to see Ronnie Wardman, who was the head of BBC Television's Night Entertainment Department. And Ronnie worked out a combined BBC radio and television deal, which might protect Billy's touring schedule and suit the band without using up the material that music hall audiences paid good money to see. He hit on the simple idea of producing the series on a fortnightly basis so that the band could tour on alternate weeks when the show wasn't on the air, and persuaded Billy to take a chance on a university graduate with no music hall experience to be his producer, me. And Billy agreed to consider a pilot show to see how we got on. I knew the band well from its shows on radio and the Hackney, Chiswick and Shepherd's Bush Empires, those musicals, which I was never out of, and thought I could see how its music and comedy could be translated to the screen. So I went up to Manchester to see the band's stage act at the Opera House. And over a late night supper, I told Billy some of my ideas for the television show. To his surprise, as he told me months later, he found that for all my university background, we were speaking the same language. And when we parted, he said, "Sleep well, son. Don't worry. I'm too good for you to bugger up." And he was right. He was right. In Wakey Wakey, which is what we called the Billy Cotton Band Show, we managed to add the gloss and glamour of television to the band's musical fun. Scriptwriter Jimmy Grafton and I deployed the band's musical skills in new comedy numbers without ransacking its precious stage material. I used every technical device to add visual appeal to its musical numbers. We introduced guest artists in comedy routines with Billy, and I persuaded him to perform dance numbers, the line of dancers. The juxtaposition of a dozen beautiful, glamorously dressed girl dancers with this bluff, portly, 60-year-old man who, like many large men, was capable of the lightest and most delicate movement, was irresistible. The pilot show became a series, and it ran for 12 years. I saw it through its first year, and Billy and I became great friends. He asked me to produce his Christmas stage show at the Prince of Wales Theatre. We holidayed together in Alassio in Italy. He was a lovely man, and I loved him.
Yeah. As a BBC producer in the early 50s, what was your initial attitude towards commercial television?
Well, at the BBC, we were remarkably complacent about the competition's chance of success. We believed that commercial television, it would be years before the BBC could bring itself to call it independent television, would be brash and vulgar, and viewers would hate it. They wouldn't tolerate having their programs interrupted every few minutes by those ghastly American jingles. There wouldn't be enough viewers anyway. The service was only going to be broadcast in London to begin with. It wouldn't extend to the Midlands for another 6 months, and it wouldn't cover the whole of the North for more than a year, by which time it would be bankrupt, which is what we thought. And we weren't terribly wrong. Granada in the North nearly went belly up. It had to be rescued by Rediffusion in London, who supplied it with 85% of its network schedule for the next 4 years in exchange for 85% of Granada's advertising revenue. But some of us began to think about the prospects of a more gainful employment in ITV. Not me. I'd gone from one sheltered environment to another, from school to national service, from university, I'd won a state scholarship, to the BBC. And the idea of working in the cutthroat commercial world was unthinkable for me. And there were plenty of attractive production prospects to look forward to at Lime Grove.
You spoke about swapping sides to join ATV. What were the main differences between both networks' output during this period?
Well, you're quite right. I did swap. I tell you, I mean, my BBC contract was up for renewal, and I was rehearsing a show with Eamon Andrews when I was summoned to see the establishment officer to discuss my contract, a new contract. He offered me another one for 2 years and asked if I had any questions or comments. I said, well, I'm earning £1,700 a year at the moment. Could it go up to 1,800 for the next 2 years? Oh no, he said, working for the BBC is reward enough. I returned to the studio pretty downcast, and Eamon's manager, Teddy Summerfield, who'd popped in to see how rehearsals were going on, said, you look glum, what's up? And I told him my story. You can do better than that, he said. Would you be prepared to work for ITV? Damn it, I said, yes, I would. Let me make a few calls, said Teddy. When he came back, he said he'd been on the phone to Lou Grade, who would like me to join ATV. He said he offered £3,500 a year for 3 years. I told him, says Teddy, I told him I didn't think that was enough. So he threw in 2 weeks in New York for the first 2 years to study American television. All expenses paid. What would you like me to do? Bite his hand off, I said. It wasn't ATV's money that spurred me. I was more attracted to those weeks of studying American television in New York. What hurt me was the feeling that the BBC didn't think I was worth another £100 a year to keep me. And of course, as it turned out, ITV's programs were by no means brash and vulgar. They were just as good as the BBC's. After all, most of them were being made by ex-BBC people. The commercials, jingles and all, were lively and funny. The news was delivered not by anonymous voices over still pictures, but by newscasters, personalities like Robin Day and Christopher Chataway. Their quiz programs gave away really significant sums of money as prizes. In Huey Green's Double Your Money, as much as £1,000. In Michael Myers' Take Your Pick, motorbikes, refrigerators, kitchen units, even trips to Australia. And in the game shows that I'd been producing for the BBC, the prize for the winners would have been at best a certificate to indicate that they'd beaten the panel. There were fast-moving American shows, comedies, drama, unbelievable differences. Lucille Ball's I Love Lucy began its British run on ITV's opening weekend. Sunday night at London Palladium. British stars previously featured only in occasional guest spots for the BBC were now appearing in their own weekly series. On ITV's opening night, Harry Seacombe in the first of 6 weekly shows written by Eric Sykes, followed by the Billy Cotton shows we've already talked about. So there was a vast difference.
As producer of Sunday Night at the London Palladium, how important was this show in the popularity of commercial television?
It was vitally important. I mean, first of all, it was on a Sunday night, and BBC never had variety on Sunday night. I mean, this was unbelievable for the viewer. I mean, they were seeing huge stars that otherwise they only ever saw on in the movies and on, or heard them on records, it made an absolutely enormous difference to British television, and knocked us at the BBC sideways.
And when you were looking to freshen up the Palladium by a change of presenter, you opted for a 30-year-old song and dance man to steer the ship. What was it about Bruce Forsyth that made you think that he would be perfect for the role?
I didn't. Actually, it wasn't me. I was freshening up the Palladium show with the Tiller Girls. Everybody thought that the Tiller Girls started with the Palladium show, but they didn't. It was 2 years later when I took over. New camera positions, new angles, trying out various compares a month at a time. Dickie Henderson, Huey Green, Bob Monkhouse, Alfred Marks, Robert Morley, so that I could book the best of them to take over as permanent presenter the following year. But at the same time, I wanted to do another kind of show in a studio, featuring new talent with a team of attractive all-round performers who could sing, dance, and perform sketches, especially written for the show. And I wanted to call it New Look. I remember auditioning a young Des O'Connor and an even younger Roy Hudd. After all, this was over 70 years ago. I went to, I found Roy Castle at Oxford at the New Theatre, and Dickie Henderson suggested I caught the act of a gangly young comic called Bruce Forsyth, who was wowing the audience at the Chiswick Empire. I ended up with a great team: Roy and Bruce, the double act, Joe Baker and Jack Douglas, review artists, Ronnie Stevens, Stephanie Voss, Gillian Moran, and Joyce Blair, who was then the bubbly young star of the West End musical Grab Me a Gondola. And I added Joyce's brother, Lionel Blair, as choreographer. and also the Vernon's girls who could sing and dance. And I made a pilot program, which I showed to Val Parnell and Lou Gray. Val immediately added Roy to that November's Royal Variety performance and wanted Bruce to take over Sunday night at the London Palladium. I suggested we tried him out first with a 6-minute spot to see how he took to the Palladium stage. Well, he didn't just take to it, he took it over. The audience loved his bossy, fussy personality, and the following January, he began a run as the show's presenter that lasted 4 years and led to a career that lasted 6 decades. And I lost him from New Look.
You just mentioned about bringing Lionel Blair on board as a choreographer. How did this come about?
Well, when we lost Bruce and New Look after 3 editions, the team was strong enough to continue its popular and critical success. Lionel moved over to take Bruce's place as Roy Castle's tap dancing partner. And that began his career as an all-round performer as well as a choreographer. I mean, he as well as a dance director. I mean, I took him with me. I took him with me to meet Sammy Davis Jr. at his hotel after Sammy's opening night triumph at the Big Owl. And I wanted him to choreograph the show, but I was told Sammy was bringing his own choreographer. So I retained Lionel as associate producer, just as well, because they got on like a house on fire. Lionel phoned me later that afternoon to say that Sammy had asked him to go shopping with him to get some typically British stuff like bowler hats, umbrellas, and spats, and do a number with him based on that, with Lionel as a snooty British shop assistant in a sort of challenge version of the song Shall We Dance? I jumped at it, of course, and so my associate producer was now both the show's choreographer and its guest artist, with Sammy's own choreographer simply a benign and helpful presence throughout. That was Lionel's big break.
Benny Hill remains an interesting figure within the pantheon of British comedy. You helped commission the Benny Hill show for Thames. What was it about Benny as a performer which made him perfect for television?
Well, oddly enough, when I was at ATV, and during a break between Benny's BBC contracts, he was free, and so we booked him to do a Val Parnell's Saturday Spectacular, and it wasn't very good. He used he's all he insisted on doing was using material he'd already used on the BBC, and it wasn't a success. Years later at Thames, I got a phone call from his manager to say that he'd still felt guilty about the show he did for me at ATV and would like to come to Thames to make up for it. But who would produce it? And I said, well, Philip Jones, nobody better. Philip was my head of light entertainment. And he came over, and he and Philip got together, and they were an enormous success. Benny was a strange guy, but he was a natural, funny man, which I suppose the strangeness really helped, because it was a different kind of comedy that people had never seen before. And He could do almost everything. He was saucy. Long after I left Thames, they felt that he was too saucy, and apart from anything else, they dropped him. But he was something new, and he was a huge success for Thames. Made them an awful lot of money, a great amount of money, and was loved in America. His shows ran in America for an awfully long time, and I was very sorry to see him, and so was he, leave, and as it were, sort of disappear.
Why did you think it was the right time to retire when you did?
Well, I had to. I mean, all the in those days, directors working directors, contracts usually lasted until they were 60, and when I was 60, I was due to leave LWT by then, and though they wanted me to stay on until we decided who to replace me, and then of course there was the big takeover by Granada, and LWT itself was lost. But I had to retire. I had to retire anyway. So I mean, I was very fortunate because I don't know at 60 whether I would have had another job in television. 60 was considered very old then. Now you're a child if you're 60. I'm speaking as a 92-year-old, so forgive me. Up to then, I'd actually, while I was still at LWT as chairman and managing director, I was also, I'd been asked to join the London Advisory, the Chancellor's Committee for Inner London, the Lord Chancellor's Committee for Inner London, as a member. And I'd done that and it's gone quite well, and I became a chairman of that. And then I was supposed to finish that at 70, but that went on a bit, and I was able. I'm going to have to look this up because I've forgotten really all the actual details. I mean, I was then asked to serve as a. I mean, I didn't go back to television. In other words, I was asked to serve as a lay interviewer for the Judicial Appointments Division, interviewing prospective assistant recorders, acting stipendiary magistrates, presidents of industrial tribunals, and circuit and district judges. I was invited by the Office of the Commissioner for Public Appointments to serve. Not much light entertainment in this, though. I was to serve as an independent assessor, working for the Home Office and the National Health Service. I should have finished at 70, but 3 years later, I was still interviewing prospective non-executive directors, and my P45 didn't arrive until 2010. So that's it, that's me. A strange way to end my career, but I enjoyed it in actual fact, and it gave me an opportunity to write a couple of books. One of them was about my time in television, and one of them was a family memoir. And I was very glad to have done those because my memory's gone, but they're there to remind me what happened.
Yeah, just moving on to the memoirs. In 2006, you wrote "Before I Forget." What did you learn about yourself from this process?
Well, I learned that I was a very lucky guy because the only job I actually applied for was to join the BBC. I was as a university student. My life was full of performance, of light entertainment. I produced and performed in. I did a couple of plays, but my speciality and the thing that I really enjoyed was music, reviews, comedy shows, and when I at the end of my years at Oxford, I went to the individual who was supposed to get you jobs in the future, introduce you to people who might give you a job, and I said I wanted to go to the BBC, so he got me an appointment with the BBC, and I went on what was obviously the newcomer student applications, and the fellow who said come in was sitting at his desk looking at various papers, didn't look up at me at all, and said, "Do you want to join the BBC?" I said, yes, sir. And he said, "And what would you like to do?" And he's still working away. And I said, "Well, light entertainment." He said, "Oh, no. Our light entertainment is done by people already on doing light entertainment. They come from professionals. People like you usually go into current affairs, documentaries. Wouldn't you like to do that?" And I said, "Well, no, not really." He said, "Well, I'm afraid we can't really help you. But I mean, is there anything else you want to tell me?" Well, I said, "Well, I've written songs, and they've been produced and performed on BBC and ITV." And he stopped and looked up at me for the first time and said, "On the BBC and ITV? Really? We better get you an interview." And he did. And I was interviewed by Ronnie Warman, and that went well. And so I was given 6 months as a trainee at the BBC. I did some shows which went quite well, and then he asked me to take over. He asked me to take over a show that was dying until it ended its run. I took it over, and I thought it needed some changes, and I made some changes, and it became a great success. And so he said, "Well, we'll take you on," and gave me another show. The first show to follow the BBC's hottest show, the comedy show on Sunday night. You have to remind me about that, which everybody loved. And the show I did was a terrible flop because people expected something exactly like the one that we just followed. And I thought I was going to be thrown out. I was sent for by the boss of BBC television, who said, "How old are you?" I said, 22, sir. And he said, "Well, don't worry. That show was never going to be a success. They shouldn't have given it to you. Just carry on, and you'll be okay." And I was, until the time, as I told you, my contract ran out, and And I didn't apply for ITV for myself, but Eamon Andrews' agent did. And that's how I got into ITV. And from ABC television was so successful that it became the senior part of Thames. And at Thames, so I didn't apply to go to Thames. I went with ABC to Thames. I was director of programs at Thames. And when Howard Thomas, who was the managing director, when his boss retired, Howard was going to take his place and wanted me to succeed him as managing director. But the organization that owned Thames didn't want me to do it through a manager. And Teddy Summerfield was my manager as well. And I didn't want to leave him. So I said, no. And the George Cooper, very nice guy who was in charge of sales at Thames, who 2 weeks before had come into my office to congratulate me on being made managing director, now came into the office and said, I've just been told that I'm going to be managing director. What happened? And I told him what happened and said, don't worry, I'm as happy to work for you as you were happy to work for me. But they forgot that my contract had come to an end. And when Robert Clark of LWT phoned me to say, I thought you were going to be managing director, and I told him what had happened. He said, well, so that means, but are you still contracted at Thames? And I said, no, they haven't noticed that my contract's out, but I'm happy to continue there as director of programs. And he said, well, would you like to come and talk to John Freeman, who'd be interested in talking to you? And John Freeman was the chairman and managing director of LWT. I went to see him. We walked in the park for an hour, talking about television, talking about me. And he said, look, we've been sitting next to each other in the network meetings. And he said, I like the cut of your jib. And if you'd like to come to me as my deputy in 2 years' time, if you like the company and the company likes you, I'll step down as managing director, I'll stay as chairman, and you can take over as managing director. 2 years later, that's what happened. So I discovered, that I was a very, very lucky guy. I only had to apply for one job, and all the other jobs sort of they sort of followed on.
I guess this is a difficult question for you to answer, but when you reflect upon your tenures at both the BBC and ATV, how significant were influential figures like yourself, Bill Cotton, Lou Grade, and Val Parnell in making this such a defining era for British television?
Well, Val and Lou brought something different to British television. I mean, Val, a hugely successful stage producer. Lou and his brother Leslie, hugely successful artist managers. And they brought all their contacts, their knowledge, their experience into television, which otherwise, I mean, it would have developed anyway. The BBC would have developed anyway, and indeed the BBC did develop anyway. But they brought something that was new and live. I mean, the extraordinary thing for me was that those years, those early years with them and ITV were quite remarkable, because there seemed to be nothing you couldn't do, no program idea, if it sounded all right, was turned down. I didn't have a budget. You never had a budget. I mean, you just did the show. The only time the budget was a problem was when Leslie Gray phoned me when I was doing one of the Dickie Henderson shows. And he said, "How's the show going?" And I said, "Oh, it's going well." And he said, "Have you booked it all? Have you booked everybody?" And I said, "No, not yet. Why?" And he said, "Well, you're nearly over budget." And I said, "Well, tell me what the budget is, and I'll stay inside." And he said, "Never mind what the budget is. You're nearly over it. Have you got any other plans for it?" And I said, "Well, Bob Hope's going to be in town, and Dickie and I think we can get him for the show. Would you like me not to do that?" And he said, "No. Get Bob Hope. Drop the violins." So I cut the violins out of the orchestra, and we did the show with Dickie and Bob Hope, and it was a great success. And that was the only time I was ever mentioned, that budgets were ever mentioned to me in ATV. So you can imagine what that was like for people who had reasonable ideas and good ideas in an entertainment world. That's what was the greatest of times in many ways, and one of the reasons why I call my second book Best of Times.
If students of 50 years' time were to study the career of Brian Tesler, what would you want them to take away from it?
Oh, well, what can I say? Be lucky. Do what you can, the best you can. Look out for other people's talent. Watch everything you possibly can. Look, learn, listen and learn, and use your own imagination and your own ideas to make the best of whatever you see in front of you. I mean, there's nothing more I can say than that.
That's perfect.
I wish someone had said that to me. Thank you, Josh.
Josh says that's a perfect end.
Well, that's nice.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like you've done it before.
No, I haven't done it before. Well, what I did do, you made me, I tell you what, you've made me for the last 2 days look at my own book and make notes, because as I told you, my memory, I can't remember. Seriously, I mean this. I can't remember from 1 minute to another, and my short-term memory is terrible. And I needed to look. All these are the notes I made from my book, because otherwise I couldn't have answered any of your questions, Josh. So you've done me a favor by making me look at my life. And if only you could make my memory better, that would be perfect.